Thank you so much. Thank you. We're really excited to be here today to talk about vocabulary. Um, I'm Susan, and my background is in school psychology. I was a professor at University of Rhode Island and Duquesne University, and now I am a senior research scientist at Acadians Learning. And my former student from long ago, Dr. Jenlyn Fury, is now also a professor of school psychology at Rhode Island College. We've been working together for about 15 years on vocabulary interventions and assessment, and it really is such a treat to get back together every once in a while to present this to people. We love to share this information and think it is really important. So thank you so much for being here, and we're really excited to talk to you today. Okay, so here's our plan for this morning. We'll start off with a little bit of information about how vocabulary fits into a structured literacy approach. And then we'll go through what evidence-based instructional practices look like for students in the early grades. And when we say early vocabulary, we're focusing on students in pre-K through third grade. So that's kind of the group of students that we'll be focusing on today, although some of the activities and assessments that we talk about can be extended beyond that as well. We'll also talk a little bit about vocabulary assessment, what kind of assessments are out there currently, what kinds of assessments you could create to help you understand where your students are based on classroom instruction. For both of those, we'll also talk about some diversity considerations. And then we'll finish up by sharing some helpful resources that will allow you to use what we talk about today in your classrooms without having to reinvent the wheel. So there's a lot of things out there that can help make things easier. Okay, so first up, structured literacy. The two main components of vocabulary instruction that are really well suited and related to structured literacy are that we want to be doing instruction that is explicit and systematic. Just like we want to be doing that type of instruction for decoding skills, it also works for vocabulary. So when we're talking about vocabulary, explicit instruction means we're going to provide clear and direct instruction on specific words. So instead of kind of letting kids learn words on their own and stumble upon words, which happens and is also good, we want to have some words where we're directly teaching the word meanings. We also want to provide engaging instruction with a lot of opportunities for students to respond, and then provide immediate specific feedback to those students based on their responses. And that really helps them to go away from the lesson with accurate information, and we're able to kind of see where our students are by getting that active participation. And on the other side, we want our instruction to be systematic. So instead of only relying on words, teaching words that kind of pop up in our daily lives, we want to purposefully choose words to teach and think about how to systematically plan that instruction in terms of sequencing things from easier types of activities to more challenging activities, and then providing scaffolding along the way to make sure our students can engage with that instruction. We also want to make sure that we're including repetition and repeated exposure to words. Having multiple exposures to new words will really help them learn it at a deeper level and remember it long term. So that's something we want to think about building into our instruction in a systematic way. If you've ever read about vocabulary or been to another presentation, you've probably heard about this vocabulary gap that is kind of been shown in research over and over again, that students enter school with vast differences in their word knowledge. And this is mainly based on experiences they've had with oral language before they get to school. So there's a lot of difference. And what we've found, or we haven't found this, but other researchers have found that without direct instruction, this gap just continues to grow larger over time. And Something that explains that increase in the gap is called the Matthew effect. And Stanovich talked about this back in the mid 80s. The term Matthew effect comes from a verse in the book of Matthew in the Bible that says the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. And so what's happening here is the students who come into school with large initial vocabularies continue to read more, to learn new words on their own, to have more oral language experiences. So their vocabularies continue to grow and grow. And the students who come in with lower levels of vocabulary are less likely to read more, to learn words on their own, and to have those kinds of experiences that build word knowledge. So their growth is a lot slower than the kids who come in with the larger vocabulary. So that's where that gap continues to grow over time. Another phenomenon you may have heard of is the fourth grade slump. And this is where we have some students who seem to be doing fine with reading in kindergarten, first, second, and even into third grade. They haven't popped up as needing additional intervention for decoding or fluency. But when they get to around fourth grade, they start to struggle. And part of the reason for this is that around this time, the texts that students are reading contain more advanced academic vocabulary. And if they don't have that strong knowledge base of vocabulary before they get there, they're really going to struggle to comprehend what they're reading. So if you don't know what a lot of the words mean in the text you're reading, it's going to be hard to understand. So that's why one of the reasons why it's so important to start early on with building students' vocabularies. So they have all of those years and all of that time to be adding words to their knowledge base. So when they need it to do their own independent reading and to learn subject matter, they'll have it there for them and they won't struggle. So that's why we want to provide this systematic and explicit instruction from kindergarten on, or even in pre-K, to try to prevent this fourth grade slump issue. So we will know ahead of time which students need additional support. So we want to look at something like this in terms of a conceptual framework for our instruction in the early grades. Code-based instruction, of course, this happens and is important. It's already being implemented regularly. We want to add on to that meaning-based instruction should be happening just side by side as a regular part of our literacy instruction from when kids enter school and continuing on through. And that's what will really help kids be set up for success once they get into the later elementary grades. Okay, so we want to be focusing on direct instruction because although students do learn new words on their own through what we call incidental exposure, so when you read a word or you hear a word being used, sometimes that gets added to your vocabulary. You'll figure out what the meaning is and learn a new word that way. And that happens all the time, and that's wonderful. But a couple of points about that, of why it's important to also directly teach vocabulary. One is that those children who have lower levels of vocabulary, as I said before, they're less likely to encounter the kinds of words that we want them to be learning, the advanced academic vocabulary. And they're also less likely to learn those words independently when they come across them. So it really puts students who are coming in with lower levels of vocabulary at a disadvantage. But also, it's not just beneficial for those students. Research has found that all students learn more words and words to a greater degree when they are taught directly rather than when they're learning them on their own. And so it really benefits all students. And one study found that 300 to 400 new word meanings can be learned in a year or taught in a year through direct instruction. So this is a significant proportion of words that many of our students will learn in that time. Okay, so now we'll look at what early vocabulary instruction looks like. But before we do that, I wanted to take a minute to talk about what it means to know a word. You're looking here at a continuum of word knowledge from Beck and colleagues. other researchers have similar, slightly different models, but everyone is in agreement that knowing a word is not all or nothing. You can have varying levels of word knowledge, starting with, well, no knowledge and ending with really rich knowledge where you can understand a word in multiple contexts. You understand its meaning and how it relates to other similar words. And then there are variations in between those two extremes. So a general sense would be, I always come across words where I'm like, I think that was on like SAT list or a GRE list where I was trying to memorize words. I don't really know what it means, but I remember it's either something like a positive connotation, oh, that's like a good word, or negative. And so you can kind of use that if you're reading a sentence and say, oh, I don't know exactly what that means, but I know it's not good. So you can get a general sense. And then above that, sometimes we'll learn a word within a specific context, and you'll be able to understand it if that's the context that it's used in the future. But outside of that context, you really don't understand what the word means. And then above that, we have knowledge of a word that we can understand in multiple contexts, but we don't really know it well enough to use it in our own speech or writing. So it's more of a receptive understanding versus expressive. And the reason I'm talking about it now before we look at instruction is because the type of instruction that we choose will result in different levels of word knowledge. So the first type of instruction I'm going to talk about, embedded instruction, is pretty quick and easy to do. And it results in more of the kind of lower levels of knowledge where you have maybe general sense or context bound, or maybe even that level 4 where you have a receptive understanding of it. But it's not likely to get you to that rich decontextualized knowledge, at least at the first time you do it. Whereas the other type of instruction we'll talk about later is designed to have students get to the highest level of knowledge, but it also takes more time. And so as we go through, it's always, I know, a balance between the time that we have and the outcomes that we want. So it's just something to think about as we go through and talk about these different types of instruction. Okay, so embedded instruction is instruction where we're explicitly teaching a word meaning within the context of a read aloud. And this is important because it is a relatively quick and easy way to provide a boost of vocabulary instruction beyond what the students would get if they were just hearing the word read within the context of the story. And research has found many times that this kind of explicit embedded instruction results in greater word learning than incidental exposure does. So the first thing to do if you're planning to use embedded instruction is to select a storybook to use for your read aloud. And trade books that are designed to be read aloud to children are a great source of vocabulary words to teach. So they contain academic vocabulary that is not often heard in conversations that we have with kids or the kinds of TV shows or YouTube videos that they're watching. So books are a great source of rich vocabulary. And they also provide a context that students can understand the words in. So instead of just providing kind of a list of words and definitions where they have nothing to kind of attach that onto, within a story, they can kind of see how the word is used and understand it within the meaning of the sentence or the story. So here are just a few examples of the many, many wonderful books that we could choose to use for embedded instruction. Some things to consider as you're selecting a book. We're going to talk about word selection in a little bit, but you want to kind of look through and make sure that there are appropriate kinds of words that you could target for instruction. This example here, a pocket for corduroy, you can see before we even get to what kinds of words we want to look for, you can probably already tell these are some great words that kids probably don't know, or a lot of them may not know, but they're words that we could easily teach a kind of simple definition of, so that they could understand those words moving forward. Another thing that we want to say about storybook selection is to think about your students in your class, their cultural backgrounds, the diversity that they bring to the classroom, and find storybooks that represent your students. So that really can mean a lot for students to be able to read about experiences that they can relate to and see characters that look like them and remind them of themselves. So that's another thing to think about when choosing storybooks. Some types of books are not as useful for teaching vocabulary, and they're wonderful and useful for other important things. So we're absolutely not saying that any of these are not great books. But things like predictable picture books likely won't have the types of words that we're looking for in terms of teaching. Same thing with books that focus on a lot of rhyming and wonderful phonological awareness types of teaching can happen there. But you're not likely to find the right types of words. And decodable texts, again, great for practicing newly learned sounds and practicing decoding, but likely won't be useful for vocabulary. So now we'll go through the 4-step process of providing embedded instruction, and I'll go through each of these individually in the upcoming slides. So the first step is to select 3 to 5 words to target for instruction. 3 to 5 words is kind of the general recommendation that you usually will see in the field of vocabulary. A lot of the research that was done on this process used somewhere between 3 and 5 words. There have been studies to show that kids can learn more word meanings than that. But with each new word that you add, that's additional time, of course, and also interruptions to the story. So you can determine what's the right amount of words for you. But 3 to 5 seems to be a pretty reasonable amount for most classrooms doing this kind of activity. So the types of words that we're looking for are words that are important for understanding the text that aren't explained clearly within the text. And then also words that students will encounter often. So these are words that they'll get a lot of use out of. If you teach them now, they'll see them again and again. So it will be a useful kind of word for them to know. And we love this word classification system from Beck and colleagues that helps us to kind of think about what tier a word would be in. So tier 1 words are kind of basic words that most students will know when they enter school. So words like dog, run, look. Most students will not need explicit direct instruction on these words, although some might. So that is something to be aware of and to use these types of words when students need them. And then I'll skip over to tier 3 words. Tier 3 words are words that are usually specific to a domain, like a science word or a geography word, that are also usually kind of complicated to explain, more like a higher level concept. And they're not likely to be seen frequently in various contexts and outside of whatever domain that word is from. And then we have tier 2 words that go right in the middle of those 2 extremes, where they're words that students could get a lot of use out of. They're kind of more advanced labels for concepts that students already understand. So you're not really teaching a new concept, you're teaching a new word that describes a concept that they already know. And so some examples of these kinds of words would be contradict, proceed, retrospect. We have another list on the next page of a lot more tier 2 words. These are from some work that we did a few years ago, but you can see just looking through, these words are words that kids may not know the word, but they would understand if we explained what the word meant to them. So for example, most kids would know that some objects can be easily bent or they're bendable, but they might not know the word flexible. And so that's what we're looking for, to teach this new label for something that they already understand. So I'm going to show you some examples from the book Imogene's Antlers by David Small. This is just one sentence from the book. I'll read this out loud. Her brother Norman consulted the encyclopedia and then announced that Imogene had turned into a rare form of miniature elk. So just take a second and look at that sentence and think about what words might fall into that tier 2 category that we would consider using for instruction. Okay, now we'll show you what words we chose on the next slide. We chose consulted, encyclopedia, announced, rare, miniature, and elk. So there are 6 words in this one sentence that could potentially be a target for instruction. And we are absolutely not recommending that you choose all of 6 of these words to instruct within one sentence. That would get a little wild. But these are examples of good options that you could choose to select. And then the next page shows these are all words within Imogene's Antlers. So again, that point about the use of storybooks, you can see it's a great resource for words to select and directly teach. So when you have a lot of words within a book, like this example, you want to narrow it down so you're not teaching all of them. And there are a lot of different ways you could do that. You could just think about what words you think are most important for your students. I like to look at the pictures and choose words that have good picture support in that particular book, because that's a great way to kind of reinforce learning, especially for younger students and for emergent bilinguals. And so we chose difficult, glared, lovely, assistance, and overjoyed to continue on with, though there are no wrong answers in this part here. All of those words are good options for instruction. Oh, and here, so the next step is to create a student-friendly definition. So I have some examples here of dictionary definitions for some of the words that we have used in our past work. So this example here is stroll. The dictionary definition is to walk in a leisurely or idle manner. And as you can imagine, that definition wouldn't go over well in a kindergarten, first, second grade classroom, because it has words in it that you would also need to define, like leisurely and idle and probably manner. So we want to simplify that so it's easy for them to understand. So our definition for stroll is to walk slowly. Now that definition does not get at all of the nuances of the word stroll, and that's okay. So we want to start off by just giving kind of a general, clear definition, and then through repeated exposures in different contexts, through activities that you'll do with these words, they can kind of build on their understanding and understand more of the nuances of a word. So we might do some activities around this word and talk about when you might stroll and why you would stroll and what does strolling look like. And all of this will kind of come together to help refine that initial basic definition. And then a couple more examples. Sturdy, a definition from a dictionary is soundly constructed or constituted. Now that one certainly will not work well. So we gave that word sturdy the definition strong. And again, this does, sturdy is a type of strong, but we don't go into that when we're providing the definition. That will come through the examples that we provide. And delicate, very fine in texture or structure. And our definition is something that breaks easily. There are some children's dictionaries that have more appropriate definitions than the ones that we shared here. And we have some examples in our resources at the end, but sometimes even they need to be modified. So just always be thinking about how can I make sure that this definition is as clear and simple as it can be. So here are the definitions that we came up with for our 5 words that we chose for Imogene's antlers. Difficult is really hard. Glared, to look at something angrily. Lovely is beautiful. Assistants are helpers. And overjoyed is very happy. And something else I want to point out here while we're talking about choosing words and coming up with definitions is that it's important to also be aware of cognates for our emergent bilingual students. So a cognate is a word that is similar in spelling, pronunciation, and meaning in both languages. And so I have some examples here of English and Spanish words, and you can see looking at that list, they look very similar, they sound similar when they're pronounced, and they mean similar things. And so by pointing these out, we can really build on the strengths and knowledge of our emergent bilingual students so that they can just add on that English word a little bit easier based on the knowledge that they have in their first language. We also want to identify false cognates, because these are things that could really be tricky and confusing for students. So these are words that are similar in spelling and pronunciation, but not meaning. Students could get confused by seeing a word that looks and sounds like a word they know in their first language, but has a very different meaning. So just identifying those ahead of time can really cut out a lot of confusion. And for Spanish, anyway, about 30 to 40% of words in Spanish have a related word in English. So it's a pretty good percentage of words, which makes it really valuable to take some time and try to provide this information to Spanish-speaking students. And you don't need to be fluent in Spanish to do this. There are lists that organizations have created that have Spanish and English cognates and other languages as well. And we'll provide some resources at the end that you can use for that as well. Okay, the third step is to introduce the target words before the story. So before reading, you're going to say each word aloud and ask the students to repeat the words. And then you instruct the students to listen for the words and raise their hand when they hear them in the story. So here's an example from Imogene's Antlers. When I read the story, I want you to listen for these words. Repeat after me. Difficult, and then they'll repeat. Glared and overjoyed. When you hear these words in the story, raise your hands. Okay, and then the next step and the final step is to teach the word meanings when they're encountered in the story. Okay, so when you encounter a word, you'll stop reading to provide this short lesson where you provide the definition, you read the sentence that contained the word again, but with the definition in place of the word. You'll point out any picture support if there is any, and then have the students repeat the word. So here's what it looks like in our story for the word overjoyed. So this is the sentence from the book. When she came down to breakfast, the family was overjoyed to see her back to normal. And then hopefully some students raise their hands and you would say, oh, good, some of you raised your hands. What word did you hear? And they say overjoyed. Yes, overjoyed. The family was overjoyed to see her back to normal. And if students did not raise their hands, which sometimes happens, after you read the sentence, you could say something like, oh, I think I heard one of our words. Listen and raise your hand if you hear a word, and then just repeat the sentence. And that always works. And then you'll go on to say, overjoyed means very happy. When she came down from breakfast, the family was very happy to see her back to normal. In the picture, you can see that her family is smiling and look very happy or overjoyed. Everyone say overjoyed. And so that's what you would do for each of the words that you selected ahead of time. As you can see, it's pretty brief, but it gives them a lot of good information. And again, I'm a big fan of the picture support when necessary. It helps them to really connect to it and remember. And so this is our little 4-step process for embedded instruction. And now Jenlyn is going to talk about extended instruction.
Great. So extended instruction is what we're doing following embedded instruction. The embedded instruction that was done through storybook reading and the steps that Susan just walked through. Beck and colleagues referred to these same types of activities as interactive instruction. So if you're familiar with Bringing Words to Life and the activities in those books, this is very similar. Extended instruction is really important, especially for students who are having underdeveloped vocabularies. So this is providing all students with an opportunity to get to a deeper understanding of word meanings. But this has been shown through research to be really necessary for students who are starting with underdeveloped vocabularies and need more explicit follow-up instruction. So again, with extended instruction, we are supporting a more nuanced, complete word knowledge. We are providing repeated exposure to the target words that we've already taught through embedded instruction. And really importantly, this is giving new context. So outside of the context of the storybook reading, we're learning about this word in new examples. We're encouraging students to eventually generate their own examples, use the word to relate to their own lives, make their own connections. And through extended instruction, we're also providing immediate feedback to students, and it's helping us as teachers or interventionists to get some formative assessment information so that we know if what we're teaching, if students are learning, if they're ready to move on to more advanced types of activities, or if we need to provide more scaffolding. And just as a reminder, Susan did a great job of explaining this. With our extended instruction, we're wanting to be thoughtful about sequencing. So we're starting with activities that are really just an introduction to the word that they're just starting to learn. We're helping them to have a general sense of the word meaning. And then as we move through the sequence of activities, we're aiming to help students develop that really robust decontextualized word knowledge. So I'm going to give some illustrative examples of what these activities look like. This is not comprehensive. There are many other activities that you can, and variations of these activities, but we wanted to give you an idea of what this might look like. The nice thing about these activities is that they're very easy to create and implement once you have your word selected. So here's an example of an initial follow-up activity that would be part of extended instruction. So this could be done in tier 1 with the whole class, or it could be done with a small group of students in tier 2. You would just have to sort of adjust how you presented it so that you could, as the teacher, you could be getting that formative assessment information. So the first type of task would be an example, non-example, and you'd be using a picture support. So for the word overjoyed, the teacher would say, hold up the picture and say, does this picture show someone who looks overjoyed? If you think the picture shows overjoyed, put your thumb up and say, she's overjoyed. If you don't think it shows overjoyed, put your thumbs down and don't say anything. Okay, so if you're doing this tier 1, you'd have, get a sense of how many students are able to identify that this is a non-example. And then you're giving the feedback. This picture does not show someone who looks overjoyed or very happy. The girl was frowning because she did not want to eat her dinner. So this would be a non-example, and then the next one would be an example that does show the word. Um, Importantly, whenever possible, when doing these follow-up activities, try to create opportunities for students to say the word. That helps to really build their phonological representation of the word, to get practice saying the word, and just that repeated exposure. Okay, here's another variation of example and non-example. So here we have two pictures. These can be either printed out or on a projector or smart board. You can just put them up. And so the teacher will say, what picture shows people strolling? If they give the correct answer, then feedback might look like this. Yes, this picture shows people strolling or walking slowly. The boy and his dad are strolling on the sidewalk. So notice with the teacher feedback, again, you're repeating the word, you're giving that student-friendly definition, and then you're also modeling what this word would look like in a sentence. So you're kind of modeling using the word in a new, different context. Okay, and now here's another example for the word delicate. Again, we have an example and a non-example. And just to give you an idea of like how to respond if there were a lot of incorrect responses, the teacher might say, the snowflake is delicate because it can break easily. Let's try again. Which picture shows something that is delicate? So again, we want to focus on the target word rather than kind of the non-example. And repeating the word, repeating the student-friendly definition, and giving students opportunities to respond correctly. Another example for timid, and these are stock images that were pretty easy to find. At the end of the presentation, we give some links to free available stock images that you can search for coming up with some of these activities. So this is one for timid. And another variation with using pictures to really support initial word learning and recognizing these target words is picture sort. So now we have more pictures, half of them are examples, half are non-examples. And if you're doing this in a tier 1 with the whole class, and especially for upper grade levels, you can kind of label each of these. And in my case, I labeled them A through F. And that's just going to help more students to respond rather than only letting a couple of students respond and everyone else is watching. So for this one, which of these pictures shows collaborating? We're sorting the pictures that are examples into one pile, non-examples into the other. Again, if it's tier 1, you could have students think, pair, and share. So before responding out to the whole class, students could think about picking the ones they think show collaborating, partnering, talking about their answers, and then sharing out just to maximize those opportunities to respond. And here are some examples of the teacher feedback. So for the correct classification of the target word, we might say that's right. The boys are collaborating or working together on their science project. And then we're explaining that's not collaborating or working together. The girls are fighting over a toy. So these are just some examples of the activities that you can do while using picture support. And that's a really great way to start your extended instruction. Again, they're just learning these words. They don't yet have the in-depth word knowledge. We're working towards that while providing scaffolding. So another level of activity that is getting increasingly advanced, again, we're working towards helping students to have a more rich, decontextualized knowledge of these words, is a yes-no verbal activity. So for this, we're not relying on a picture. We're going to be presenting this information verbally, and the teacher would say, here's a question about our word overjoyed. If you think the answer is yes, put your thumb up. If you think the answer is no, put your thumb down. Would you be overjoyed if you dropped your ice cream on the floor? Okay, so you're having students think about the target word in this different context that's different from the storybook scenario, different from the previous pictures. So they're really having to think about this word in this new context. And then you're giving the feedback. If you said no, you're right. If you dropped your ice cream on the floor, you would not be overjoyed or very happy. So notice with the teacher feedback, we're repeating the word, we're repeating the definition, again, trying to support those multiple exposures. And here's another example for difficult. Would it be difficult to slam dunk a basketball? And this can be done whole class or small group. And then we can talk about, providing that scaffolding if needed. If the majority of students are answering correctly, then that's giving you that formative information to say, okay, they're understanding this level of word knowledge. And so building off of the extended instruction activities, again, moving towards that deep vocabulary knowledge and the ability to actually produce and express their knowledge of the word. Create a sentence activity is asking students to use the word in a sentence. Before we're having students do this activity, we always want to model it. So for this one, the teacher would say, let's make a sentence with the word ecstatic. I'll go first. I felt ecstatic when all of my students completed their homework. Okay. And let's hear from someone else. Can you think of us using a sentence and telling me when you would feel ecstatic or when a person might feel ecstatic? And so a great example of this, everything going well, would be the student saying, I feel ecstatic when I get a present. So the student is showing that they're able to use the word correctly with a new context. And so that's kind of what we're looking to see. And we want to give feedback. Yes, I would feel ecstatic or very happy too to get a present. So every opportunity we can when we're giving feedback, we want to repeat the word, repeat the definition, and just continue to support their use of the word. But that won't always happen. So we won't always have students who are able to immediately create a sentence. And that's why we want to be thoughtful about providing scaffolding when it's needed. So here's a kind of example of how that might look for a student who's not quite ready to create their sentence independently yet. So a student might say, it's their turn to give their sentence, and they say, I feel ecstatic. Teacher would say, good start. I feel ecstatic when, and then student doesn't know. So the teacher can provide support, and you're in a great position to do this because you know your students. You can help them brainstorm, thinking about their interests, and helping them to make a connection. So the teacher might say, well, what's an activity you like to do that might make you feel ecstatic or very happy? And eventually the student's able to come up with an example of that they feel ecstatic when they play with their dog. We want to keep scaffolding and eventually get them to say the word in a sentence that uses the correct context. So eventually we get the student to say, I feel ecstatic when I play with my dog. So that's an example of kind of how this might look if your students don't immediately create a sentence that's correct. Or if they can't think of anything, another way to scaffold is you will have, pictures that you've already used for previous activities, or you could just have some pictures ready, and you can have them look at the picture to help come up with an idea to sort of inspire creating the sentence. So in this example, let's look at the picture to help us make a new sentence with the word ecstatic. And the student's able to, with the picture support, um, give a sentence that uses the word. Okay. So as you continue to support the student learning through the create the sentence activity, we're going to, again, model a good sentence with the target word, and then ask for students to give responses, being very encouraging. Sometimes students will give a sentence that it's almost exactly like the previous student's sentence. We want to encourage students to come up with a new sentence, a new idea, to really help them to understand that there are many different contexts in which we can use these target words. And now we're getting to more advanced types of activities. We would not want to start our very first follow-up activity with something like a word web. But after we've gone through the previous activities and we see that our students can use the word in a sentence, they're identifying examples, they're recognizing it, we're now getting into a type of instruction where we're helping them to really think more deeply about the word. So word webs are a great way to do this, even in the early grades, where they might not actually be able to read what we're writing on the board. We're still going to use either a dry erase board or a smart board to represent what we're talking about through these verbal conversations. So this can look a lot of different ways. One way to do this is to have students, we're going to put the target word in the center, and then together we're building a web of kind of semantic networks of the meaning of the word, words that mean the same thing or synonyms, words that mean the opposite, a student-friendly definition, and then building off and giving some examples. So we're really helping to facilitate brainstorming of documenting what we know about a word. And here's an example for the word overjoyed. This is a completed word web, but in this activity, you're starting as the teacher by putting the word in the middle and saying it out. You're saying everything verbally so that they're having the verbal exposure to it. And then through this activity, we might start with the overjoyed in the middle and say, can someone tell me what does overjoyed mean? And so when we hear the definition very happy, we're going to write that and say it out loud. Who can think of an example of a time where someone would feel overjoyed? And so we're helping to go through this activity, generate examples. When it comes to identifying synonyms and antonyms, something that we can do here is we can actually um, try to encourage students to make a connection to words they've learned previously. So they may have the previous week learned about the word ecstatic, and now we're encouraging them to make that connection that these are similar words in terms of their meaning. And maybe another week, one of the words was miserable, and we can try to make those connections. So through this type of activity, we are um, deepening the word knowledge of the target word, but we also are providing kind of more of a connections among words, especially words that we've already taught. So this is a really great activity to get into the in-depth word knowledge. And fostering word consciousness is something that we really encourage you to do outside of the scheduled time where we're sort of scheduled to be teaching reading and literacy. Word consciousness refers to instilling an interest in words for students. So helping students to just notice when they know a word or when they don't know a word, and to think about the meanings of words in different contexts, to be interested in using the words, and to understand how important it is to build their vocabulary so that they can be very specific in describing things in their lives. So word consciousness is something that we want to foster. You can do this in a lot of different ways. Modeling is great. So modeling it just in your day-to-day life, going about your classroom routine, using the words that you've just been teaching is really great. Really encouraging students to use mature language and to use these words in their everyday conversations in the classroom. Here's an example. This is from Beck and colleagues from their book. It's showing students using these sophisticated words in their everyday language. So, good afternoon, salutations, Miss K. Greetings. How was recess? Invigorating, exhausting. We played football. Delightful. There was a lovely breeze. Abbreviated. It was too short for me. So this is a really great example of really encouraging students to think about using these tier 2 words to describe, to communicate, noticing opportunities, all of these teachable moments to use the words that we've been teaching. Beck and colleagues referred to something very similar as energizing the verbal environment. And what's really nice about this is it can be done all day. There's lots of teachable moments, and it's just kind of being aware and reinforcing that. And then finally, throughout the extended instruction activities, we want to provide ample review. So the storybook through the embedded instruction should be read multiple times. And we want to give multiple opportunities to discuss the words both within the lesson and across. Another way that we can kind of help to support ample review is the homeschool collaboration piece. So sharing with families, these are the 5 words that we're learning this week, and here are the student-friendly definitions. It just would give another opportunity for students to be using the words in another setting and to be encouraged. So ample review is kind of the last piece we wanted to point out regarding the extended instruction. With all of these activities, there are many considerations of how to potentially adapt and uh, really make sure that this is meeting the needs of all of our students, including students who are emergent bilingual students. So within each activity, we want to know our students, give them opportunities to respond independently, but if they are struggling, we want to provide scaffolding as needed. Visuals tend to be a really great way to provide scaffolding, modeling, using sentence starters, all of those activities are going to really support any student who needs a little bit extra. Giving students in Tier 2 and emergent bilingual students more opportunities to respond, and really knowing our students, knowing their background knowledge, cultural information, knowing our students' interests. That's really going to help us to make this instruction meaningful when we're picking stock photos to use or examples to use. We can use examples that we know they'll get excited about and will help them to kind of stay engaged. And then important for all students, but especially students with underdeveloped vocabularies, is to make a point to provide praise and encouragement. So those aren't all of the extended vocabulary activities. There are many other ways to support, um, and the Bringing Words to Life book has a lot more examples that you can look to. As we kind of close our presentation today, we do want to touch on the early vocabulary assessment, um, particularly in a multi-tiered system of supports framework or MTSS framework. So I would love to start gathering some information from all of you for our Q&A now. We'll come back to this in just a few minutes. But if you are able to write into the chat to answer this question, we're curious to know, for those of you working with students pre-K through grade 3, how are you assessing vocabulary knowledge currently? In terms of universal screening, in terms of progress monitoring, what are you currently using that is specifically measuring vocabulary? So we'll kind of monitor that while I talk about some big ideas with vocabulary assessment. So with MTSS, there are many types of assessment that we want to use to inform database decision making. Universal screening is what we do with all students, usually 3 times a year, and it helps us with vocabulary. It helps us to understand which students have underdeveloped vocabularies and therefore may need more intensive interventions. And then another broad type of assessment is progress monitoring, and that's helping us to answer the question, is the student learning the words that we are teaching them? So with early vocabulary assessment, compared to what's available for phonemic awareness and phonics, fluency, and reading comprehension, there's relatively few screening and progress monitoring vocabulary assessments. And that's especially true at the early elementary grades. So there are many challenges to assessing vocabulary, including like just answering the question, what does it truly mean to know a word? There are many different ways to assess vocabulary. So currently there are relatively few measures available, especially compared to these other areas. but we do want to draw your attention to some that we think are promising. So one broad type of vocabulary assessment is a receptive knowledge task. And typically it looks something like this, where we show 4 picture options and ask the student, point to the picture that shows slumber. So it's multiple choice. They do have a chance of guessing correctly, but it's helping us to get a general sense of their receptive knowledge, or how well they can recognize something about the word meaning when they're given multiple choice options. And so here are some examples of assessments that would look at receptive vocabulary. The Peabody Picture Vocabulary Test, the Ortiz Picture Vocabulary Acquisition Test, and the Receptive One-Word Picture Vocabulary Test. Susan and I have been kind of reviewing lots of different vocabulary assessments, looking to see what's being done in the research. And what we appreciate about these is that they're relatively efficient to administer compared to some other options. It still is, 10 to 20 minutes and it's individually administered. It's still longer than many of the other screening assessments we'd be giving. But these are some options for receptive vocabulary. And another broad way to measure vocabulary knowledge is to look at expressive knowledge. So a test that's looking at expressive knowledge would ask something like, show a picture and ask, what is she doing? And they can get a point for saying a series of different responses that would be considered correct. Or another version of this would be a definition expressive task. So what does slumber mean? And then there's kind of within tests like this, if they say a 1-point response, sometimes you can query to see if they can give a complete definition. And a couple of examples of expressive vocabulary tests are the expressive vocabulary test and the expressive one-word test. And then here listed are 3 examples of vocabulary tests that include both receptive and expressive. So the comprehensive, receptive, expressive vocabulary test, the test of preschool vocabulary, and the vocabulary assessment scales. And these are all in the handout. But important considerations when selecting a test, if we're using a norm reference test, it means that we interpret the results in comparison to the sample norm group. And so we want to know if the norm group is similar to the student that we have tested. And that's especially important when the student that we have tested is an emergent bilingual student. So a lot of the tests that I've just previously shown either have very few English learner or emergent bilingual students in their sample, or those students were excluded from the sample. And so making those comparisons might not be appropriate. So here I have listed some early vocabulary assessments that are specifically designed for emergent bilingual students. So the first 3 that are listed measure English proficiency, including vocabulary. And you're comparing the students' results to other emergent bilingual students. The Ortiz Picture Vocabulary Acquisition Test is also appropriate and has a separate norm group of native English speakers, but they also have kind of a stratified group of emergent bilingual students. And then the last 3 that are listed are specifically for students who are bilingual in Spanish, and they're measures that can help us get a better sense of their vocabulary skills in Spanish when compared to other Spanish-speaking students. When it comes to monitoring the progress of vocabulary, this is probably the area of vocabulary assessment that has the most limited research. If you look on the National Center for Intensive Intervention site and you search for progress monitoring and vocabulary, there are some results, but when you narrow it down to the early grades, there really is very limited and almost no measures that are listed there anyway. So this is an area that does need some more research, but our considerations are that we want to assess the same words that we've taught. And we recommend using formative assessment using multiple methods. So not just one method to see if they've learned a word or not, but multiple. And Susan and I have been reviewing research that's looking at vocabulary intervention to see what researchers are using to measure vocabulary learning. These are some examples of the most common types of assessment that we see being used in research. So one type is an expressive definition task where we ask the student to tell me what the word means, and there's a scoring system. Receptive picture, where you have 4 pictures and you ask the student to point to the picture that shows the word. Or an expressive one word where you're asking them to tell you the word that the picture shows. Other ways to measure is more contextual knowledge, either an open-ended question, such as, where is a place that you would be slumbering? Or a yes/no question. Do most people slumber during the day? So this is what we're seeing vocabulary researchers use to measure the words that we're taught. We do have some helpful resources that we recommend to you, especially for practitioners. So a great book that many of you may already have is the Bringing Words to Life book by Beck and colleagues. And in particular, chapter 4 is focused specifically on early vocabulary instruction. And they have a wonderful appendix at the end of the book that has a menu of activities. Many are similar to the ones that we've gone through today, but it gives lots and lots of examples that I think are very helpful. And McCowan and colleagues also have a great book focused on vocabulary assessment. And chapter 6 of that book has a lot of great information about practices in the classroom. A few other resources before we wrap up. These are available in the handouts, but something that can be helpful when planning your lessons is to find good quality stock images. These are some examples of free stock image sites. The Color in Colorado site has a lot of great information about supporting emergent bilingual students, and they also have a Spanish-English cognate list, which is really helpful. A couple of references for student-friendly definitions. If you're kind of feeling stuck with explaining a word in a student-friendly way, those are great resources. If you were going to create a word web digitally on a smartboard, there's some great resources to help make that more engaging and interesting. And then finally, we recommend the National Center on Intensive Intervention Screening and Progress Monitoring tool site to help find appropriate assessments for vocabulary and other reading skills in an MTSS framework. So we're going to wrap up, just summarize some of the big key ideas, and then we'll be taking your questions in just one moment. But a summary of the key ideas we presented today. First, a structured literacy approach to vocabulary is what we recommend. We want explicit and systematic instruction. We want to be very clear and purposeful and direct in our instruction. And we want to be systematic or have a logical scope and sequence of how we're introducing words and providing scaffolding as we move from general knowledge of a word to more robust, deep, nuanced knowledge. Both embedded instruction and extended instruction are recommended, and they are evidence-based and shown to be effective. Extended instruction is going to be especially helpful for students with underdeveloped vocabularies, and it's going to help increase the depth of knowledge for all of your students. But we recognize kind of the balance of extended instruction does take more instructional time. We recommend a combined approach of both reading, introducing books through storybook reading, and then also extending that instruction through these follow-up activities. And then finally, we recommend using formal assessment to identify students who need more support, and informal formative assessment to monitor their progress. Okay, so we are ready for your questions and to be reviewing some of the wonderful responses that you've already given related to what you're using for assessments. We're going to open it up for questions now.